I have a small confession. I'm embarrassed to say I'm slightly new to the world of MMA and UFC. Very much around the era of Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor. And I remember being up in the early hours at a friend's house. I think it was a Mayweather fight. The second Mayweather's fight finished, and I wanted to watch the analysis because I'm a big fan of that, as I've mentioned before. He flicked over to the UFC. I see two guys rolling around on the floor together, and I'm like, mate, this is not real fighting. I'm glad to say that I stuck with it. I've educated myself as much as possible in the last 4 or 5 years, and it's come on, and I'm loving it. If you were to recommend to me or our viewers fighters or fights of yesteryear that will show the sport in its finest, what would you pick?
For a boxing fan, I would say who wants to get into UFC, go back and find Vanderlei Silva versus Brian Stan. Absolutely terrific stand-up, just a complete and utter war. What are the fun ones has there been? Pat Barry versus Czech Congo, one of the most incredible come-from-behind knockouts of all time. Just think it's mostly going to be stand-up guys that people are going to appreciate. You know, go back and watch Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva's highlights from his heyday. You know, John Jones from 10 years ago when he beat Shogun, when he won the belt, when he beat Machida, Rampage. You know, he went on this run of absolute legends and was just lighting everybody up. Yeah, man, they're the fights to go back and watch. You know, I was there in Boston when James Toney took on Randy Couture, you know, and that was absolutely mental. And I remember at the time, MMA fighters were drawing it up as boxing versus MMA, which is best. And I was like, this is utter bollocks. Because obviously if Randy Couture had stood in front of James Toney, they got knocked the fuck out. Yeah. And ultimately what did happen was Randy Couture shot for a takedown, put James Toney on his back, and, you know, it's just basically a fish out of water. So it's hard to compare the sport in that way. But you can, the beauty of the UFC, and it does take time when you first start watching it because, you know, we're not a grappling nation. None of us wrestled in school. There's no many significant wrestling clubs in the UK. You know, the UK wrestling team is completely underfunded and, you know, never really does too well at tournaments. Obviously, Mike Grundy, who competes in the UFC now, was at the Commonwealth Games and stuff for England and whatever else, and wrestled all over the world. But, you know, he's from a club in Wigan. You know, that's a tiny little club, and wrestling's just never really been a national sport here. Where it is in America, it's a big thing, wrestling. So the grappling side of it is obviously a lot more natural to them. And then, of course, you've got South America and the Middle East who are obsessed with jiu-jitsu and submission fighting. So there's that appeal from them as well. But, you know, I've watched fights in Brazil where guys will be standing up and knocking 7 bells out of each other just in a crazy boxing match. And the fucking Brazilians aren't saying a word. And yet as soon as it goes to the ground and they start fighting for arm position and fighting to take each other's back and go for submissions, the place is fucking in standing ovation, in raptures, you know? And that's just how the sports, what people appreciate. And that's probably the success of MMA really is, you know, you've got every facet of every fighting sport that actually works is involved in MMA. So if you're in Thailand, if you're a Thai fighter from Thailand, or if you're a karate for guy from Japan, or a judo from Japan, or karate from China, or whatever it may be, and you can appreciate the sport because your skill set is involved in it. You understand that nuance of what the fighter's trying to do. And when I first started watching UFC and MMA, it was very much, you know, a kickboxer versus a judo guy, and how have they managed to cope with the other guy's strengths to win? Whereas obviously in modern day MMA, modern day UFC, you've got a whole generation of fighters now that are in sport or coming into the sport that have trained MMA since they were babies rather than coming from a different martial art. So the sport's evolving faster than anything, and it's here to stay, you know, so you better get into it because there's a reason why people are talking about it. And obviously Dana White and the UFC was so incredible this summer by not stopping for coronavirus, by doing everything they possibly could to keep going, because they cornered the markets for a couple of months there. It was the only live sport going on. I think a lot of fight fans had a little taste of it then and thought, yeah, you know what, I'm quite into this. I think people are starting to realize now, as you said earlier, it's like the first time you've seen it, two guys on the floor, and you went, oh, this is not a real fight. Actually, when you think about it, it is a real fight.
Yeah,
Boxing's not a real fight. Oh. Boxing is the sweet science. Boxing is artistry. But you watch any fight outside of a pub or in school on a playground, no one stands there like this for 10 rounds. Within two or three punches or kicks, both guys are on the floor rolling around. And that's fundamentally where jiu-jitsu, certainly Brazilian jiu-jitsu, came from. You know, it came from the favelas and the beaches of Brazil, where these guys were surfers fighting for space on the beach. And it would always end up in a fight on the beach. And then they quickly realized, the Gracie family especially, they quickly realized that ground fighting was the real skill. Being able to fight on the ground was so much better than being able to fight on your feet, because you could tie somebody up, and that's basically where fights ended up. So that's where the evolution of early jiu-jitsu into Brazilian jiu-jitsu truly came from. And obviously, quick history lesson, it was one of the Gracie family members who'd moved to America and was running a jiu-jitsu school out of his garage in California, and was teaching a couple of Hollywood executives. And that's basically where the idea came from. They threw some money at it. They started the Ultimate Fighting Championship to see which martial art was the best. But the Gracie family from Brazil, they orchestrated all that, because on the night they had a sumo guy, a kickboxer guy, all these elite strikers. And they had this little Gracie brother, Hoyce, who stepped in his pajamas and fucking ripped everybody's arm off. And suddenly the world went, oh my God, that's how you properly fight. And that was obviously where MMA was pretty much born, and the evolution then of the UFC. So I think anyone coming to it now, yes, of course, you're coming to it late, but dip into the striking side of stuff, you know, have a look at the strikers first, and then you'll slowly kind of get into it. You know, we've all been in a fight at some stage in our lives. We can all appreciate it when someone grabs someone's leg and takes them down and holds them down. And the more you watch UFC, the more you watch MMA, you'll realize then, oh, he's actually trying to get on his back. Because if he's on his back, he can go for chokes, he can go for arms, he can go for locks and whatever else. And I think the more you watch it, like anything, the more you expand your knowledge, and then you'll never look back.